John Lewis, Lion of Civil Rights in Congress, dies at 80, by Associated Press, adapted by News ELA staff on 7/20/20. Word count 1192, level 1040, Lexile. Caption: Image 1: Civil rights activist and Congressman John Lewis is introduced before speaking at the unveiling of a U.S. Postal Service stamp commemorating the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington, August 23, 2013, at the Newseum in Washington, D.C. Lewis, who carried the struggle against racial discrimination from Southern streets of the 1960s to the halls of Congress, died July 17, 2020. Photo: Charles Darapak, AP Photo. John Lewis, a longtime member of Congress and leader in the civil rights movement, died July 17th. He was 80 years old. Lewis's bloody beating by Alabama state troopers in 1965 helped boost opposition to racial segregation, and he went on to have a celebrated career in Congress. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, a Democrat from California, called him one of the greatest heroes of American history. All of us were humbled to call Congressman Lewis a colleague and are heartbroken by his passing, Pelosi said. May his memory be an inspiration that moves us to fight injustice, she said. Praise for Lewis came from both the Democrats and Republicans. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, a Republican from the southern state of Kentucky, said Lewis was a pioneering civil rights leader who put his life on the line to fight racism and promote equal rights. Lewis, a Democrat from Atlanta, Georgia, said in December 2019 that he had pancreatic cancer. He said, I have never faced a fight quite like the one I have now. One of the Big Six civil rights leaders. The announcement of his death came just hours after the passing of the Reverend C.T. Vivian, another civil rights leader who died July 17th at 95 years old. Lewis was the youngest and last survivor of the Big Six civil rights activists. It was a group led by the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. It was a group led by the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. was best known for leading some 600 protesters in the Bloody Sunday March in Alabama 1965. At age 25, walking at the head of the march, Lewis was knocked to the ground and beaten by police. His skull was fractured. Nationally televised images of the police's brutality forced the country's attention to racial oppression in the South. Within days, King led more marches in the state, and President Lyndon Johnson soon pressed Congress to pass the Voting Rights Act. The bill became law, removing barriers that had kept Black people from voting. Speaking alongside Martin Luther King Jr., he loved this country so much that he risked his life and his blood so that it might live up to its promise, former President Barack Obama said after Lewis's death. He used nonviolent resistance to bring about real change in this country, Obama said. Lewis joined King and four other civil rights leaders in organizing the 1963 March on Washington, D.C. He spoke to the vast crowd just before King delivered his famous I Have a Dream speech. Then, 23 years old, Lewis gave a powerful speech. He said, by the forces of our demands, our determination, and our numbers, we shall splinter the segregated South into 1,000 pieces and put them together in an image of God and democracy. At this time, segregation was going on in schools, businesses, and other public places. Black people were not allowed to go to the same places as white people. Growing up in the segregated South. Lewis was born on February 21st, 1940, in Pike County, Alabama. He grew up on his family's farm and attended segregated public schools. As a boy, he wanted to be a minister and practiced his speeches on chickens. Denied a library card because of the color of his skin, he became an avid reader and could cite historical dates and details even in his later years. He was a teenager when he first heard King preaching on the radio. They met when King was seeking support to become the first. When Lewis was seeking support to become the first Black student at Alabama's segregated Troy State University. He instead attended the American Baptist Theological Seminary and Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee. He began organizing protests at whites only lunch counters. Volunteering as a freedom rider, he endured beatings and arrests while traveling around the South to challenge segregation. Lewis helped found the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and was named its chairman in 1963. That made him one of the Big Six. The others were King, Whitney Young of the National Urban League, A. Philip Randolph of the Negro American Labor Council, James L. Farmer Jr. of the Congress of Racial Equality, and Roy Wilkins of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP. They met to plan the March on Washington, leading the Bloody Sunday March in Selma. The huge protest helped the movement, but success didn't come quickly. After training in nonviolent protest, Lewis and Reverend Hosea Williams led demonstrators on a march of more than 50 miles from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama's capital, on March 7, 1965. Police blocked their exit from a Selma bridge. The event became known as Bloody Sunday. Authorities shoved, then swung their batons, fired tear gas, and charged on horseback, sending many to the hospital and horrifying much of the nation. King returned with thousands of people completing the march to Montgomery before the end of the month. Lewis was elected to the Atlanta City Council in 1981. He won his seat in Congress in 1986. After Democrats won control of the House in 2006, Lewis became his party's senior deputy whip, a leadership post in which he helped keep the party unified. Obama honored Lewis with the Presidential Medal of Freedom during his presidency. They marched hand in hand in Selma on the 50th anniversary of the Bloody Sunday attack. Securing his place in American history. Lewis was also worked for 15 years to gain approval for the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. He had success in Congress in 2006 when he led efforts to renew the Voting Rights Act. However, the Supreme Court later struck down much of the law, and it again became what it was in his youth, a work in progress. Later, when the presidency of Donald Trump challenged his civil rights work, Lewis did not hide his anger. When Trump later made a comment about how some countries' citizens should not be allowed to immigrate to the United States, Lewis declared, "I think he's a racist." Lewis said he'd been arrested 40 times in the 1960s. He was arrested 5 more times as a congressman. At 78 years old, he told a rally he'd do it again to help reunite immigrant families separated for the Trump administration at the United States southern border. "If we fail to do it, history will not be kind to us," he shouted. "I will go to the border. I'll get arrested again if necessary. I'm prepared to go to jail." Lewis's wife of 4 decades, Lillian Miles, died in 2012. They had one son, John Miles Lewis.